Ryan Bouchard and Emily Schmidt, who created the Mushroom Hunting Foundation. They exist to educate people about safely hunting for wild mushrooms. It's a nonprofit organization that aims to make mushroom hunting better understood and well known as part of our culture. They teach various classes on all aspects of mushrooms and have shown literally thousands of people how to better appreciate their own local wild mushrooms, or even enjoy eating them. Without any help from major bookstore companies, they sold over 4,000 copies of Ryan's book, Gourmet Mushrooms of the Northeast. Welcome.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.
So you mentioned part of our mission being trying to make mushroom hunting more a part of our culture. There's a lot of reasons for that. There's a lot of reasons why we want to do that. But just as a little bit of a background, we've read many times and we've seen it ourselves that in America, mushrooms and the whole kingdom fungi are sort of unappreciated a little bit or not understood. And what we've read is that this is sort of inherited along with the English language. We've inherited from the British a sort of, no thanks on eating these wild mushrooms. We don't want to get poisoned and die.
Yeah.
Obviously that's a reasonable enough fear. It's not that no one in England hunts for mushrooms, but compared to certain other parts of the world, it's not so popular. Some other parts of Europe and Asia and Russia and certain parts of the world are known to really appreciate their own local wild mushrooms, and it's more part of their culture. And we found that although that's generally true of Americans, including us, when we first started learning about this, we were like, wait a minute, what's a mycelium? Where do the mushrooms come from? We didn't know the most basic stuff about it, and that's typical of our culture. And once we started learning about it, we found that it's actually pretty easy to understand. And some mushrooms are difficult to identify.
Yeah.
And, some we would consider expert level because they resemble very poisonous mushrooms, and you need to know a lot of details to tell them apart. But other mushrooms we would consider safe for beginners, meaning that you can identify them easily, recognize them easily, and just check a couple things about them and know for sure, this is what I think it is, and it's safe.
So actually, to your point, my father-in-law has been finding some mushrooms. He's been texting them to me with it's a question mark after. It's like it's a picture and then it's a question mark. And then he's like, can I eat this? So this is what he sent me just the other day. I don't know if you can see that too well.
Well, I think I can see it well enough to, before I go ahead and tell you to tell your dad to eat that, I would like to maybe text me the picture.
Yes, I will definitely. Yes.
If you can email us that picture at info@mushroomhunting.org, and
Perfect.
We will check it out. But what I want to say preliminarily is that looks like a shaggy mane.
Yeah.
And that is a
very delicious mushroom. They've been popping up recently pretty much everywhere. That's one of the great things about mushrooms. If they're fruiting in one location, they're usually fruiting everywhere. And they're having a good season when they're having a good season. That being said, that from the description that Ryan gave you, the shaggy mane, there are a lot of dangerous white mushrooms with tough stomach caps too. So keep an eye out for, definitely want to text us that picture. And for any viewers, don't say any mushroom that looks like that is a shaggy mane. So.
Well, so I looked it up, and then I also realized it could be a vomiter. There's a kind of similar, and so I was like, whew, this is getting a little. So I said, maybe just let that one go until I actually ask someone. So let's talk about that, because we don't want folks just going out and eating everything and dying. What is it in Russia? Is it 200 people a year die from eating poisonous mushrooms? And I think the U.S. is just one person a year or a couple people a year.
Well, that does make sense in a way because of the prevalence of mushroom hunting in European culture, and also a lot of the people that get poisoned. I don't want to speak for them, but I would imagine that they may not know exactly what they're doing, and that can be true here as well. And I think there's with the modern culture and the quickness of everything, and the everyone wants the sort of Instagram version of how do I go mushroom hunting. I think there's a little bit of real danger there. we found that the internet can be a great resource, but you need to know who you're talking to, and if you're in a chat room and you post a picture of a mushroom and some guy says, oh, that's Scraptopium photenageae, and oh, wow, this guy really knows what he's talking about. Well, you put 1 foot in mushroom hunting and all of a sudden you can start spouting Latin names, and that doesn't necessarily that doesn't necessarily mean that you know them and you've got them right. So there's some danger there. There are some real experts on the internet, of course, but is that who's in that chat room at the time, or is it just Joe Schmo that kind of wants to make it look like he knows what he's talking about? So we recommend finding a good source, such as us, or using a book. We really kind of emphasize using books because it's sort of a non-fluid form of information, and you can refer back to it. It's not going to change underneath your feet.
Yeah.
And so we've got our own book, which I'll sort of demonstrate in a bit. But my book recommends other books as well. You want to have a handful of mushroom guides, so let's see. So I've kind of lost the thread for a second here. So about the mycelium and mushrooms in general, and what we tend to not understand about where they come from. What is a mushroom? A lot of people have asked us questions on a sort of sustainability basis or an environmentalist basis, like, what happens if I pick this mushroom? Am I going to destroy it? Is it going to grow back? If I pick too many of these, will it die off, or will it harm the species in terms of its population?
Well, you're not degrading mushrooms by harvesting them because it's just the fruiting body.
Exactly.
That's right.
So all mushrooms are connected to something called a mycelium, which is essentially the actual organism in the story here. The mushrooms are just the reproductive structure coming from that mycelium. So even though the mushroom is the only part that we can actually see, the mycelium is actually more important in a way. If you learn about the way the mycelium behaves, you can narrow down how to find the mushrooms you're looking for. We all know, well, most of us know mushrooms can't produce their own food like plants do. They have to get nutrients in one of 3 different feeding styles. They can decompose organisms, other like dead wood, rotting leaves, that kind of thing. Those are called the saprobic mushrooms. And then there's parasitic mushrooms, which can actually attack living organisms. My favorite group is little known, and they're the mycorrhizals. Mycorrhizal is a kind of long word, but myco refers to fungus, rhizal refers to rhizomes. And what happens is the mycelium underground interlaces with the roots of a tree, and it has this symbiotic exchange that's beneficial for the tree, where the mushroom receives the sugars and carbohydrates that the tree has harvested through photosynthesis, and the mushroom in return provides the tree with a lot of water and nutrients. So there's great edibles in all 3 categories, mycorrhizal, saprobic, or parasitic, but that's the way that the mycelium kind of behaves. And they all need rainfall, and that's why it's been such a bad year for mushrooms, because we've been in a persistent drought.
Out here in southern New England, we've had a serious drought, and it's been the worst mushroom season we've ever seen in 11 years of doing this. But there are still some neat things out there, as usual.
They will always surprise you. There's always something out there.
Yeah.
But the mycelium, it looks like this white, fuzzy, cobwebby material, and you generally don't see it. Sometimes you'll see it if you're raking, or if you break open a decomposing log, you'll see this white kind of spider-webby, rubbery material, and that's mycelium. And that is the actual creature in the story. The mushrooms are its fruit. So the mushrooms are sort of emerging into the world to release spores. And spores are, you can think of them as, in a simple way, you can think of them as the seeds of a mycelium. They're microscopic. It's like a little mote of dust, but when a mushroom releases literally millions of spores, they sort of pile up like a dust that you can see. You can take a spore print of a mushroom and see what color the spore dust is. And that can sometimes be important for identifying mushrooms, especially some of the more difficult ones.
Another way that you can study mushrooms is by taking spore prints. This is an easy thing to do. You just take a mushroom cap, put it right side up on a piece of paper or glass or tinfoil, and then you let it drop its spores overnight, covering it over with a bowl or something so that the air currents don't disturb your print. And what you're left with is a really beautiful, almost photographic negative of the spore-bearing surface. What you're looking for there is just the color of the spores, which can lead you and place them into a certain family or a genus, help you identify your mushroom and gather more information. But like with all things in mushrooms, it's not just one characteristic that makes a mushroom edible. It's a combination of key features that you want to look for. It needs to be the sum of the parts.
And that's why we try to categorize mushrooms in terms of, are these sort of safe for beginners level, or are they more of an intermediate mushroom? Or some of them we would say are experts only, ones that really do have quite dangerous or deadly lookalikes, and sometimes needing to look at very specific features to tell them apart. But the easy ones, generally you just learn one or two things about it, and you can go from there. When in doubt, throw it out. It's just so we need to stick in people's heads, because if you're like, oh, I'm like 95% sure this is a porcini mushroom, that's not good enough. If you're not 100% sure, you just don't eat it. And that's how you do this safely. And yes, that means sometimes you've got this big, perfect looking specimen of some species of mushroom, and yeah, I think this is the porcini, but I'm not 100% sure, so I'm gonna throw it out, or leave it outside. Or you could contact someone like us and have us confirm the identification for you. And sometimes that's very easy. We'll glance at a picture that you send and say, oh yeah, that's such and such. And other times we'll say, all right, first of all, we're going to need a picture of underneath that mushroom, and it's going to need to be, that picture's a little blurry. We need it a little clearer. Or we might say something like, we need to slice this mushroom in half, and we're look at the inside, see either whether it's hollow or not, or whether the flesh stains a certain color when it's sliced open. So there's neat little things like that depending on the mushroom. But there are some that are very easy. So that's what we say about that is, you find a mushroom and you're flipping through your field guide, looking at pictures and comparing them. And comparing pictures is a perfectly fine way to begin the process of trying to figure out what you have. But you never just say, oh yeah, that's one that looks like that, let's eat it. No, that's dangerous. You want to read the information in the book and check the details about it. And what we recommend for beginners is that when you find a mushroom, one of the most important questions is, this mushroom that I think might be edible, is it something that's known to be an easy one? If it's not, well established that this is one of the easy mushrooms, then you probably ought to hang back, study it, take some pictures of it. Now that's the interesting thing. A lot of people are afraid of mushrooms in this country, and because some of them are poisonous. And one of the big misconceptions is, fair enough to think this, but people are afraid that if they touch a poisonous mushroom, that the toxins will absorb through their skin. Again, that's a reasonable thought, but really it doesn't happen.
Not like a poison frog.
Exactly right. You can't absorb through the skin. And oddly, since you mentioned the poison arrow frogs, some people will assume that some of the most brightly colored mushrooms are sort of like they have warning colors, like the poison arrow frog or a yellow jacket or something. Like nature's trying to tell you, whoa, poisonous, watch out. But with mushrooms, that's not the case. In fact, some of the most dangerous mushrooms are fairly drab in appearance, and some of the most beautiful and colorful, striking mushrooms are perfectly safe and edible. But it's of course not as simple as that. You need to know exactly what you've got before you cook it and eat it. So yeah, back to the whole thing of we'll talk about cooking in a little bit, but let's talk about physically collecting mushrooms.
You want to keep your collections of mushrooms in separate bags. A lot of people use a basket and just throw them all in. But we use these wax bags that are really good. They're kind of breathable, so the mushrooms don't spoil as easily as they would if you put them in plastic bags or Ziploc, containers. You don't ever want to keep them in plastic. And you want to refrigerate your mushrooms as soon as possible too. They'll last in the fridge for about a week or more. If you can pack a cooler with you when you go on long treks, it's good to get back to the car to keep them cool. You want to keep them away from your pets too, like people who hunt with their dogs and stuff like that. That's all well and good, but keep an eye on them because dogs can be poisoned by mushrooms too. We're going to talk a little bit about certain gear that we use. Like the most essential tool is your mushroom knife. Just a simple, brush at the end. I'm not sure if they're like boar bristle. There's a certain kinds of material that's really doesn't collect dirt, but wipes it away. And a curved blade kind of helps. Keep it in your pocket. This one has a little ruler on the side of it too, so you can. And they're inexpensive and really, really handy. Definitely want to. Some people we know who travel, they just use a plastic knife because they can get that on planes and stuff like that.
Yes.
That can take anywhere, but a nice foldable knife to keep in your pocket is indispensable for this hobby.
I want to stress though, you don't have to have a official mushroom knife, which is what this is. The brush and the knife on. You can just have a regular pocket knife and some type of brush. If you have a small wall paintbrush from Home Depot, that does the job. You could take your roommate's toothbrush and use that if you don't like them very much.
Too abrasive.
But yeah, basically, you don't need a spiffy little mushroom knife with the brush combined with it, but it is very helpful if you have one of these. And the whole point of the brush is to clean the mushrooms dry. You don't want to wash mushrooms clean or rinse them because, well, there's a couple of reasons. One is that it makes them more soggy. And then when you go and try to cook them, when the process of cooking a wild mushroom is largely the process of driving out a lot of the moisture that's in there. And so if you're adding water at the beginning, that's, sort of going the wrong direction texture-wise. And also, and this to us, this is probably the most important thing, water sort of goes in one side of a mushroom and comes out the other and takes some of the flavor with it. So you want to avoid that. So what you do is you brush the mushroom clean with a dry brush, and then you slice it up and saute the slices. And
wild mushrooms must always be cooked. There's few rare exceptions to that rule, but in general, it's better to just remember, cook them all. That way you will avoid, problems with digestion and stomach upset. And some of the, even the most famous wild edibles like porcini and morels are actually mildly toxic if they're raw. So you definitely want to cook all your wild mushrooms. And our general rule is to cook them about 7 minutes over medium heat. So they get kind of crispy, a little bit golden brown. And once they improve the texture there, you add salt. Once the slices are nicely golden brown, you want to salt them because salt will bring out the flavor of every mushroom out there.
Okay, so you salt it after it's cooked down, though.
Yeah.
That's right, yeah.
I've heard, never experimented with doing one with a control, but I've heard if you salt the mushrooms too prematurely or before you cook them, it can drive the moisture out too quickly and you'll lose flavor. So you want to salt them only when they're done cooking.
Gotcha.
That's something that we do recommend to bring out the mushroom's own flavor. The salt really helps. But in terms of other flavorings, our main thrust with our teaching about that is that you should try to experience what these mushrooms actually taste like before you start seasoning them like crazy. So, for example, say you find a small we keep going back to the porcini, so I'll just use that as an example. We find a small porcini mushroom, you know it's a porcini, and you're excited and say, all right, you know what, I'm going to make a pizza with this. So you take this mushroom and you slice it up and you fry the slices and they shrink up to about half their size. And in the end, you've got a pizza with one piece of porcini mushroom on each slice. And that's not the best way to experience the flavor of porcini. Now on a day when you get a bunch of nice big ones, you can make meals with them. But what we're saying here is that if you don't know what the porcini mushroom even tastes like yet, well, don't throw it into a soup and then try to see what it's like. You want to try it relatively plain. Slice it up. The slices should be between 1/8 of an inch and 1/4 of an inch thick, and saute them for 7 minutes on just about medium, maybe a little bit below. Some stoves, get run pretty hot on medium, but basically medium for 7 minutes. We flip all the slices halfway through the cooking process. So, we set a timer and do that. Now, if you make them thicker than 1/4 of an inch thick, your slices, then the 7 minutes might not cook it thoroughly. So that's why there's a standard for the thickness of the slices and the cooking time. And so in terms of what to cook them with, uh, we recommend for the first time you try a mushroom, cooking with a bland oil. There's a lot of reasons people say not to use canola. So maybe something like avocado oil or grapeseed oil or something like that. Something that doesn't have a lot of flavor at all. So that when you're tasting the thing, you're just tasting the mushroom. A little bit of salt at the end to bring out its own flavor. And once you get familiar with it, you may have all kinds of ideas. You may very well say, "Ooh, these would be good cooked in butter. A little extra sweetness instead of this plain oil, or these would be great in olive oil, or even more than that, you could say, oh, these would be great with garlic and onions, and nutmeg, or rosemary, whatever. There's all kinds of things you can do, but we do recommend getting familiar with these cool flavors, because that's one of the other reasons why we feel we need to educate Americans about this, is because there's a sort of deficit in our appreciation of the amazing diversity of flavors and textures, colors, and shapes of mushrooms out there. A lot of people in America think that mushrooms all taste the same. And that's because of a very specific reason. And if you go into the supermarket, and let's say you've been buying the white button mushrooms all the time, and you're like, yeah, I love these mushrooms, but I want to try a different kind of mushroom. They got other ones there. Let me try one of these brown button mushrooms, the cremini, or the baby bellas that are slightly bigger. Or maybe I'll get some portobellos, the big caps. Well, all the things I was just talking about, the white buttons, the cremini, the baby bellas, and the big portobellos, all the same species of mushroom. And it's hard to believe that, but think of the button mushrooms. They grow and open up and flatten out. Now it's a portobello. And so it's a great flavor. Some wild mushroom hunters really sort of disparage the supermarket mushrooms like they're totally boring, but we've always loved the regular mushrooms, and there's a whole world of different things you can cook with them, the different sort of stages of growth. You can get the big portobellos that make like a burger out of it. You can get the little ones and stuff them or marinate them, whatever. So, but the thing is, every species of mushroom is just like that. It's a whole world of ways you can prepare it, ways that it looks at different stages of its growth. And so we really recommend trying these things on their own to see what they're like. You might be blown away. What people describe as a mushroomy flavor, that word may soon seem very, painfully vague to you. What do you mean, mushroomy, like smoky, like black trumpets, or you mean kind of like a strong,
sweet, like candy caps,
right? It can even be sweet, or
sugary almost, like.
Or more of a savory flavor, or a little bit of spiciness to it. Sour in a good way. Some mushrooms are actually sour in a good way, and there are some mushrooms that are edible, but they're not any good.
Bitter.
Yeah, super. We've tried a couple that were just utterly nasty. The birch polypore in particular, it tastes like if you want to experience that, just pour some dish soap in your mouth and squish it around. And, but there's some flavors that will just knock your socks off, and that's how we got into this. Actually, we took a class with the Rhode Island Audubon Society about 11 years ago, and another student in the class had brought in a big chicken of the woods, which is this one here, big orange and yellow mushroom. And this guy brought one in and was kind enough to sort of split it up so everybody in the class could take a chunk of it home and cook it. So we did that. We cooked the chicken of the woods in butter, and it was quite a revelation. Basically like, oh my God, how come there's something so delicious out there that we've never tried? How come this isn't,
that nobody even knows about, that you can't find in the stores?
Yeah, and the other thing is, in so many cases, it's just being wasted by growing in the woods and no one ever discovering it and just disappearing back into the woods. Yeah, I think that's the other thing too, which I think is the massive untapped food source that we could be going after that we're not.
That's true, and especially with the pandemic and everything, we've sort of seen our thoughts about it shift a little bit from, oh, this is a cool gourmet hobby to supplement, a delicious meal with some, very special ingredients. And all of a sudden it's seeming a little more like, this could help your family survive someday, who knows?
Yeah.
But of course, let's hope society holds together for us. It doesn't become that crucial to know your mushrooms. But
one thing I wanted to mention was preserving mushrooms. It's a big part of mushrooming to get into putting up for the season, for next season. So you can do this by dehydrating them. A dehydrator is fairly inexpensive, and you can make other fun things with it, like jerky. You can even make mushroom jerky with it. And you can make fruit leathers and stuff, but dehydrating mushrooms is key because they'll last that way pretty much forever. Some mushrooms don't dehydrate well, though, or they revive well. So in that case, we cook and freeze some mushrooms, but you never want to freeze a mushroom raw. Just grab it, put it in your freezer. Some people do that, but it's been responsible for some cases of food poisoning. So I want to caution people against freezing mushrooms raw. You can cook and freeze them, and they'll last that way for years.
So. Right. Saute them like you normally would. And then we say if you're gonna eat it, put salt on it and eat it. If you're gonna freeze it in a freezer bag, then don't salt it yet. You've sauteed it. Now you just put it in the freezer bag and freeze it, and mark on the bag, when it was collected and frozen, what it is. And we always write on the bag, not salted yet, so that we remember when you thaw it out, okay, it's thoroughly cooked, but it's not salted yet, and you're going to want to salt it. So that helps them preserve better. If you salt them and then freeze them, like Emily was saying, the salt sort of draws out the moisture, and that can cause more freezer burn. So, hold off on the salt until you're done. Now, as far as dehydrated mushrooms, they can be stored in, Ziploc bags, preferably a strong, freezer bag, though. And sometimes people put the dehydrated mushrooms in the freezer just to be sure they don't get moldy or anything. We've lately been putting food-grade silica packets in the bags of dehydrated mushrooms to, keep them from getting damp at any point. So, a couple of great ways to save them. So
moving on from cooking mushrooms, we want to talk a little bit about eating them because there's some guidelines that go along with that too. And chiefly, any person can be allergic to any species out there. That includes button mushrooms, mushrooms from restaurants. So keep that in mind. So
it's important to understand that a person can be allergic to a certain species of mushroom. Now, some people are allergic to portobellos, and they throw up if they eat portobellos, but they know that already because, like everybody, they've tried the regular mushrooms at some point. But with something more obscure, potentially you could be allergic to it and not know it because you haven't tried it yet. And this is rare. I don't want you to get too scared about this. It's rare for someone to be allergic to any kind of mushroom. And in all the time we've been doing this, none of our students have ever reported having an allergic reaction to a mushroom. And so that's a great track record for 11 years of I guess we've been teaching it for 8 years. 8 years of teaching this and nobody having an allergic reaction. That's pretty good, but you always have to remember that it's possible. And so for that reason, that you don't want to, here's chicken of the woods, I'm going to eat a whole bowl full of it. Well, that's not a good idea. You want to sample it cautiously the first time you try it. And that's not really because it's a mushroom. It's just because it's a new ingredient. If it was some strange vegetable you hadn't tried before, we would also say the same thing. Have a couple of forkfuls of it when you try it for the first time. And then the next day you can, cover a pizza with it and go crazy. We'd still recommend not overindulging with wild mushrooms, but, the idea is you try, the first time you try it, a couple of forkfuls of it cooked, and just make sure it doesn't upset your stomach or anything, and then the next day you can have more. But we want to be very clear about something. We did not just say you find a mushroom, try a little bit of it, make sure you don't get poisoned, and then have more. People have actually thought that's what we were saying at times. No, this is when you've got the mushroom identified already, you're 100% sure of what it is. Now you're going to try it. Okay, I'm going to try porcini for the first time. Well, cool. Just, have a couple of forkfuls, and then tomorrow you can, have those, have that mushroom soup with a lot of it in. Go easy the first time. Okay, sorry. I didn't. Yeah,
That's
sorry,
okay. And you also, did you also say you want to only try one new species a day?
Yeah, that's recommended as well. I mean, you sometimes at a mushroom festival or something, you get an opportunity to try a number of new species in one day, and that's fine. But in general, as you go forward as a mushroom hunter, you sort of want to give yourself a limit of trying one new kind of mushroom per day, because again, on the off chance that you are allergic to one of them, you don't want to try four different things and then you end up getting stomach upset and you don't know which one caused the problem for you. So it's just wise to be cautious when you're trying new things for the first time. And we also recommend, certainly not serving mushrooms to other people when you're personally not even sure about it yourself. That's be very dangerous and irresponsible. Um, so there are some dangers about mushroom hunting. Everybody knows there are poisonous mushrooms, but we really like to emphasize how easy some of it is. And that's sort of part of the reason why I designed my book the way I did. It's sort of a sorry, there's the reflection. Okay, it's designed as a calendar, and it was actually a 2019 calendar. So we're still selling them, and we're telling people like, please don't write your appointments in this because it won't. But it's designed around a calendar, and each month has a different topic. And once you get to the warmer months, let's see. Let me show you a good one. Oops. I should have had this set up ahead of time. Okay, here we go. Here's an especially easy one. This is in the month of August. Oh, I forgot it. The letters are reversed.
That's totally fine. I can see it. No, I can see it fine. I can see August. Black trumpets.
Black trumpets. And black trumpets are black and shaped like a little trumpet, and they're one of the easiest mushrooms to identify.
I think you can see them. One of the hardest mushrooms to spot, but they're one of the easiest mushrooms to identify.
Yeah.
That's true. You can be standing in a patch of dozens of black trumpets and just have no clue that they're there. They have a way of blending in with dead leaves and other kind of things in the environment. But black trumpets are probably the best mushroom out there. I mean,
I think so.
there's a lot of debate about these types of things, which ones are the best. And the thing to understand is there are so many mushrooms that you'd have no idea. We actually recently tried our 250th mushroom species, and it was something really special called the Alaskan gold, which normally doesn't show up on this side of the country. And that was really exciting. But so 250 species, that's a lot. And most people have tried the button mushrooms from the supermarket and shiitakes, and that's about it. Now, if you go in for Asian food, you may have tried the enoki mushrooms or the woodier mushroom. Yeah, it's in soups sometimes. And, in Asia, mushrooms are very much appreciated. Yeah. So it's another part of the world where mushroom hunting is more a part of the culture. And we want to make it more like that around here because it's just so much fun. Let's talk a little bit about mushrooms. Okay, we don't. This isn't an in-depth class, and we're not going to fully explain how to identify a whole bunch of different kinds of mushrooms. Like I said, people want the Instagram version. Here's this one. Eat it. No, it's you gotta, even with the easy mushrooms, you gotta know what you're doing. Now let's start out with this. We all know that some mushrooms have gills underneath, and that's these. Well, they're hard to see, but
yeah, you can see.
Yeah, we can see them.
Just like portobello has these little slats, like a wagon wheel, and a lot of mushrooms have gills. Not just the portobellos and shiitakes and
Something it's actually considered a super family. Thousands of species.
And it surprises people to learn that even though everything in the supermarket pretty much has gills, in the wild, mushrooms with gills as a whole category are basically considered experts only. Some of them are a little easier than that, but basically it's a more dangerous category. When they have gills underneath, they're more difficult to identify correctly, and there are more sort of dangerous imposters out there. So in general, we say to avoid eating gilled mushrooms as a beginner. However, with the help of us, for example, you can certainly enjoy them. And we also tell people, don't be so afraid of mushrooms with gills that you kind of don't even want to look at them. If you find some out in your field, collect them, take some photos, look them up in a book, take a spore print. Yeah, look them up in a book and see what you can learn about them. But respect the fact that you don't know what they are and throw them out unless you get some help. But there are other mushrooms where, you can easily identify them yourself. But part of the reason why it's confusing is because mushrooms can change so much as they grow. Now, this little guy here, this is in what they call the button stage. Believe it or not, these two mushrooms are the same species. So this one here, if you can picture it, the cap is going to open up and eventually it'll look like this. Now, as even more time goes by, the cap will continue to open up. So again, this is the same species still, but this one has gotten even older and the cap is basically turned inside out. And the reason for that is because the gills of the mushroom underneath are where the spores are manufactured and released from. So the mushroom is attempting to, expose the gills and release as many spores into the air as it can before it gets eaten by a deer or starts to decay or getting eaten by bugs or picked by humans. But I do want to make it clear that these mushrooms we're showing right now, these little gilled mushrooms here, are Amanita muscaria, which is, let's just say it's poisonous. There's a lot of things to say about it and its sort of historical uses, and it's a very interesting species, but just for the sake of safety and simplicity, let's just say that Amanita muscaria is a poisonous mushroom. Many of the mushrooms with these little warts, they're called, on the cap, a lot of those are quite dangerous, actually. So on the other hand, you've got other species of mushrooms like these here. These are called bluets, and they are quite purple, actually, rather than blue. Yeah. Now, I want to be clear about this. This is not, I'm just showing you these. I'm not saying go and eat mushrooms that look like this, because these mushrooms have gills, and you can pretty much bet that if a mushroom has gills, that there's some other kind of mushroom that looks very similar and is not good to eat. It tends to be complicated. Now, the one that you showed me, that your dad had sent to you, the shaggy mane, that's a mushroom with gills, but it's maybe the easiest and safest to identify mushroom with gills because it's got a very distinctive sort of cylindrical shape. And we'd be more than happy to provide you with some more information, including how your dad could cook that thing. Shaggy manes are really up there. Yeah,
you guys are looking excited about it.
Oh man, yeah. We've let me talk a little bit more about the diversity of mushrooms. So we've said that mushrooms with gills are a more advanced category. You need to be pretty good at mushrooms and very experienced to be safely eating those without any help. So a lot of people are probably thinking, what do you mean a mushroom without gills? What does that even mean? Well, there are a number of different families of mushrooms. Some of them, rather than having gills underneath, have pores. Now this is a huge mushroom. Look at this thing.
Whoa!
This is it's not just because it's close to the camera. This is a bolete, and it's an enormous one. It's one of the biggest porcini mushrooms we've ever seen, and it was really cool to find this yesterday. I mentioned there's been sort of a drought, but this thing grew nonetheless. Maybe the lawn was getting watered. I'm not sure. So this is, let me bring it up close. It's hard to see the texture there, but it is not gills, right?
Yes, I've found mushrooms. I mean, obviously, I don't know if but they look exactly like that. Yes, I've seen them before. Okay, and where do those normally grow?
Well, that particular species of bolete tends to grow under Norway spruce and hemlock trees. But so when you say you've seen those, maybe not exactly like so. What I'm assuming you saw was at least some type of bolete. It's Bolete, and the boletes are a family of mushrooms. So many different species of boletes, and they're not all edible, but some of them are pretty easy to recognize once you know what to look for. And there's an even easier category called the polypores, which also have the pores under the cap instead of gills, but they're sort of shaped like a big wide shelf. And in that category, there are some in that category that are, especially easy and good for beginners to focus on. Now, because of the farmers that are going to be watching this, I wanted to mention something about the puffball mushrooms. See, there are certain mushrooms that grow in fields. Most mushroom hunting, honestly, is done in the woods. You walk down paths in the woods, look under different kinds of trees, you look on different kinds of dead trees. But plenty of mushrooms do grow in fields. It's just that the mushrooms in fields tend to be a little more on the be careful side. Be extra careful because there are some dangerous white mushrooms that grow in fields and some delicious white mushrooms that grow in fields. So please do, contact us with any questions you have before you go and jump the gun and eat something you're not sure of. The puffball mushrooms. So you may have found at different times, large white things that look like sort of like a volleyball. And these are generally what we're talking about here is the puffball mushrooms. There's a notion out there that the puffballs are easy and safe for beginners. We don't like to say that, though, because even though the giant puffballs are pretty unmistakable, you could say, yeah.
There's also little puffballs, which can be very dangerous, can be confused with undeveloped mushrooms.
Well, the little puffballs themselves are not dangerous, but dangerous to, I think Emily meant dangerous to eat because you could confuse it with something else. For example, there's some relatives of this one. This is Amanita muscaria, but if you had something like Amanita kokiri, for example, or a different species of Amanita that are all white. Now, when they're in this button stage, they kind of look round. And those are called Amanita eggs. And people have died from eating an Amanita egg that they thought was a white puffball mushroom. So we always caution people about that. All the same, the puffballs are relatively easy. There's just a couple of things you have to learn to make sure what you really have. And that's the case with all the mushrooms, all the different species that there are. You learn them one at a time. So a lot of people want to know, well, people want to do this. They want to look at a mushroom and be like, edible or not? Edible? All right, good. Let's throw it in the basket. What you should be doing is asking yourself, what kind of mushroom is this? If you can figure out what kind of mushroom it is, then you can find out if it's edible or not. And what the human race knows about edible and poisonous mushrooms comes largely from centuries of watching other human beings eat poisonous mushrooms and sometimes die from it. And, geez, that guy ate that mushroom and died. Well, let's study that mushroom. Let's make sure no one else in our town ever eats that kind of mushroom again. So people have been doing this for centuries now, and there's a good body of knowledge. A lot of mushrooms are known to be edible or known to be mildly poisonous. Some are known to be deadly poisonous. And there are even actually a large number of species that are still unknown in terms of the edibility. So a bunch of mushroom experts could agree that, oh yeah, this is such and such species. Nobody knows if you can eat that species yet. And, unfortunately, that's the way it should stay, because the only way to be sure it's edible is to sort of try it out on yourself. And obviously that's foolish and dangerous. At this point, we know of hundreds of edible species, and we know of many that cannot be eaten. And it's pretty silly and dangerous to you don't want to be a daredevil with this hobby. It's not about, am I brave enough to eat this wild mushroom? It's more about, do you know what it is? If you know what it is, then you can cook it and eat it. It doesn't really take a whole lot of bravery. Obviously, it's a little intimidating, but it's really more about science than it is about attitude. Your attitude should be sort of cautious and reserved and never jump the gun.
Mhm.
Some of the more difficult mushrooms, we say, first time you find it, fine, but want to look for it again, see what it's like at different stages of growth. If you say these guys, these bluets, right now, these are quite delicious and purple, and the edge of the cap has this certain sort of shiny look to it. It's hard to describe. Okay, there's something else called Cortinarius alboviolaceus, the silvery violet Cortinarius, that sometimes looks very similar to that, and it's a mildly poisonous mushroom you don't want to eat. And so, what we would say if someone has found some bluets in their yard and is, oh yeah, those, I guess I had bluets last year, so maybe they'll show up again this year. What we would say to that student is, well, you're going to want to know about Cortinarius alboviolaceus, and you're going to want to look for that mushroom. We encourage our more advanced students to really seek out the poisonous mushrooms, photograph them, collect them, bring them home, look them up in books, see if you can figure out exactly what it is. And that's generally how you do this. You take your time with it, and you get familiar with a species before you try eating it. And so, it's good to be cautious. But again, we're sort of trying to strike a balance between telling people that you need to be careful and you need to use science, the science of mycology, MYCO meaning, myco meaning fungus, the science of fungi, the study of mushrooms, mycology. You don't need to set up a lab bench and get a microscope. You just need to read a little bit about mycology in a book. Again, I do recommend my own book, Gourmet Mushrooms of the Northeast. I've mentioned it, it's got a 2019 calendar in there, but you're going to want to just ignore that. It's really all the photographs and information that are useful, and it shows you a different kind of mushroom for each month. There's the amazing lion's mane, and there's the chaga, which we'll talk about in a minute. But here's the thing about my book. You get to the last page of the calendar, and suddenly it turns into a book, and the whole second half of it is the pages turn sideways like a regular book.
Oh, and so cool.
It's a neat format. Thank you. Yeah.
There's a lot of recipes too.
Recipes, this crazy collage, and there's a lot more to it than that. I flipped through a whole section without going through there. So I just wanted to explain that it really is a book, and I designed it to be the best introduction to safe mushroom hunting. Some people might think like a big book with big pictures is for kids, but we kind of think that the large pictures in this, when talking about this subject, big, large, colorful pictures are actually very useful. So the book focuses on certain mushrooms that we consider the easiest and explains them fully, how to identify them. And it talks about some of the more difficult ones too, and recommends certain books to get further into the topic.
You can find Ryan's book and some of the fundamental rules that we've been talking about on our website, mushroomhunting.org.
Right, www.mushroomhunting.org. And you can print out a copy of the basic rules of mushroom hunting there. And you could also order a copy of our book. Normally we do all kinds of classes. We're not doing them right now for various reasons, the pandemic, the drought, and other work that we have to be doing on the computers at home right now. But we do generally, and next year I'm assuming we'll be doing a lot of these classes. We do public and private classes. So we'll do a presentation for your group or organization, or we can actually do an in-home class in your own living room, slideshow class covering all the safety rules.
And that's our most popular class. We call it the Mushroom Festival because it's very immersive and it's a whole lot of fun. It's like a party, but it's also like a school. What we do is we take our PowerPoint presentation into your living room and do a bit of a talk, and then we go outside and do guided mushroom hunting for about an hour and a half, and then we come into your kitchen and cook up all the delicious samples that we found. And we also bring mushrooms with us in a cooler just in case we don't find it.
So that's a private class. We call it a mushroom festival. And we also do, shorter classes of just a guided walk outside for a couple hours. a lot of different types of public and private classes. So we encourage you to get in touch with us. Email us at info@mushroomhunting.org. And I don't mean to sound like I'm trying to wrap it up. I just, while we were talking about it, I want to make sure we got our contact info out there.
You were mentioning the chaga mushroom, which has been really interesting to me because of the health benefits of that. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
We certainly can. Chaga, first of all, is a pretty strange mushroom, and I can show you a picture of it in my book. It's on the December page.
Okay.
It grows on birch, and you'll want to look at the pictures a little closer. We've got an actual chaga here to show you. We chose that for the December page because throughout the winter, obviously, there are not so many mushrooms around, but chaga is something you can actually collect any time of year, even in a blizzard, if you're so inclined, because it's hard as a rock and it persists for a long time. It's found on birch trees, and well, let me show you a chaga. This is a chunk of chaga. And sometimes they have a weird shape. Now here's the part where it's connected to the tree. It was more brownish. Now I know that through the computer just now, that probably just looks like a big chunk of black stuff. There's a certain pattern that it has when you break it off. Inside, there's a certain pattern of kind of speckled golden brown. And once you've seen a few pictures of this pattern, you'll be able to recognize it. Is this a mushroom? Okay, that some people have said to us, how can that be a mushroom? It's hard as a rock. Well, technically, that's not a mushroom. So normally with mushroom hunting, you leave the mycelium alone. It's under the ground or inside a rotting log, and you don't even see the mycelium. You just collect the mushroom. With chaga, what happens is the birch tree is trying to fight off this fungus, and it sort of creates these reservoirs of mycelium that are sort of bursting out of the tree. It's sort of a side effect of the battle between this fungus, invading the tree and the tree trying to fight it off. So you get these big chunks growing out of the tree. It's basically a big brick of mycelium. And so that's pretty odd. Normally with mushroom hunting, you leave the mycelium and just collect the mushroom. In this case, you collect a chunk of the mycelium, and the mushroom of chaga is actually a small, flat polypore mushroom that grows under peeling birch bark and is almost never seen. So it's an odd species for sure. So then, okay, if this thing is hard as a rock, what the heck can you do with it? Well, the tradition comes from Siberia. There are a lot of birch trees there, and they figured out that if you boil this chaga, it makes a delicious broth, this drink, which is also called chaga.
Uh-huh.
So this is a chaga, and this is some chaga, and it's a delicious drink, actually. That batch come out good?
Oh yeah, it's got like a maltiness to it, kind of like the milk balls, and we like to use a little bit of sweetness from milk.
Yep.
To kind of counterbalance a little bit of bitterness that it can sometimes have. But it's a really healthful beverage. It's rich in antioxidants and is good for fighting inflammation. And also they're researching it for fighting different kinds of cancer too. Chaga has become very trendy and it's becoming a bit controversial. Some people say it's becoming over-harvested, but it's definitely not. We see it everywhere, and we leave it as good karma sometimes, and sometimes we take it for our classes to teach other people. But in terms of people using it for general immune support, there's a lot of other things that can be used for immune support aside from chaga. I've heard from some mycologists who are getting a little heated about the chaga debate, saying that only people who have a certain condition like cancer should be using chaga. Because of its value, essentially. And it does grow back, even though you collect the mycelium. Chagas will return on the same trees. There's more growing because it's mycelial mass, the sclerotium that it's called, that you collect.
So about the whole topic of mushrooms and health, we try to stay on the fence about it because there's two sort of extreme sides to the fence. On one side, you've got people saying that natural medicine is totally bogus go to your doctor. Just, don't buy herbal supplements. Just go to your doctor and take what they say. And then on the other side of the spectrum, you got people saying, well, the medical, the pharmaceutical industry is all messed up, and natural medicine is the way to go. Well, okay, that's not too extreme. The extreme version of that is buy this chaga from me, and you won't have to pay for your expensive chemotherapy. So we're talking serious snake oil salesmanship with some of the people that are doing it. I think the responsible people that we don't actually sell mushrooms, but I think if someone's doing it responsibly, they can talk about the health benefits, the antioxidants, and the sort of the fact that it's generally healthy for you, and that it may prevent or cure different kinds of tumors. These things are still being researched, but it's all a little bit up in the air. What we say is that, well, we know it's a safe and edible mushroom, and that the chaga drink is actually quite delicious. And if you got some birch trees on your property and you got chaga there, I see no reason not to make some nice, delicious batches of chaga with it. Now, someone might say for health reasons, for example, Emily mentioned cancer. If someone has cancer and they've decided to take chaga as sort of a health supplement, first of all, I would say, talk to your doctor about it, of course, just like any health supplement. But some people say for a specific health reason that you should drink a light brew of it every day. Our method is to make a strong brew of it for the taste of it. It's a delicious tea or brew that you can make from it. So what we say is to, take now this is probably over a pound. Maybe take about half of this, crush it up. Now that's a little difficult. There's different ways to do it. One of the
Even with a sledgehammer, it's hard.
Well, I don't know.
It is.
You might want to wrap it up in some cardboard, smash it with a hammer, and then take it out. Now you got it in crumbly chunks. You don't have to pulverize it into a dust.
Yeah.
I suppose if you wanted to be super efficient about the absorption into the water of the tea, you could grind it into dust and then painstakingly filter out the powder. But we would say to just kind of bust it up into little marble or golf ball sized chunks, and about half a pound of that, bring it to a boil and then simmer it for 2 hours. All right, so you want to, you might as well make a whole gallon of it with a half a pound of chaga if you're going to go through with it, because it's you don't want to waste 2 hours of stove electricity making 1 cup of tea.
Great thing about chaga is it is a medicinal mushroom that can also be tinctured. So you can soak the mushroom in a strong Everclear or vodka or something for about a month or even 2 months, and then strain out the solids. And then you can make tea from those grounds that you've tinctured, and you get a double broad spectrum use from the mushroom.
Well, that's
Gotcha.
And then the tincture is a really concentrated, potent version of the chaga, so you take only a couple of drops of that. You're not like downing shots of chaga.
Right.
Yeah.
Important, actually.
You can overload yourself that way.
Some people making tincture with the reishi mushroom really damaged their liver, and it turned out that they were sort of drinking the mushroom tincture like shots or mixing cocktails with it. And now, like Emily said, we're talking about it's a concentrated thing, a couple of drops of it in another drink, coffee in the morning, a couple of drops of mushroom tincture. Don't drink the stuff like water or booze or whatever, because, it's concentrated. And, again, this gets into the realm of herbal supplements, and that's really not our focus.
Yeah, we're not doctors or herbalists, so we don't feel comfortable dispensing medical advice. We can only tell people some of the research, but say more is needed. And with individual differences, it's hard to say, what the proper, what your threshold is of tolerance and what it is of efficacy. So it's hard to say.
But I think we can say that chaga is healthy and good for you in general.
Delicious.
It's also delicious. Yeah,
And
really
it's the
is.
one mushroom you can find in the dead of winter. In fact, traditionally, it's collected in the wintertime because it's easy to see on the white trees in a white background of snow with this black mass on a tree. They're easier to spot in the wintertime with all the leaves off the trees. So, and Ryan and I get a little stir crazy after we've been studying our field guides and not finding anything for months in the winter. We take a trip up north where there are more birch trees, into Vermont and New Hampshire, where there's a lot more chaga to be found.
Okay. I don't know. I'm assuming, if you go up to maybe the Upper Peninsula or maybe not even that far, there's plenty of birch trees and plenty of chaga. Speaking of which, I don't want you to get the impression that chaga hunting means you go out, find a tree with a big chunk of stuff on it, and break it off and start brewing it. There are many different kinds of burls and tree diseases that.
Most importantly, I wanted to highlight the poisonous lookalike for chaga, which is black cherry knot. It only grows on cherry and plum trees, but young birch can look like a cherry tree, like a young cherry. So.
That's right. The bark of a cherry tree can look very similar to, like a silver birch or something.
And black cherry knot is definitely very poisonous. And so is cherry wood, in fact, anyway. So you wouldn't want to, make a tea of cherry bark.
Right.
Yeah.
And there's a way to identify the chaga. Like we were saying, it's not just go and break off some chunk of stuff off a tree and boil it. There's a certain pattern on the outside of the chaga, and there's another sort of pattern on the inside. So when you look at the outside, I'll bring it up close, but I'm afraid it's not going to come through too clear. There you go. There's a pattern of squares and cubes.
This is all splintered wood, wood from the tree.
Right. Yeah. A little
but
bit.
He's talking about that.
Yes, I see that. I can see that. Yes.
And
it's almost got a geometric cubic cracking to it, where it splits in like squares.
So that's the outside. So we got two things so far. You want to be harvesting it off of a birch to begin with. White birch, silver birch, black birch, yellow birch. We've found chaga growing on all of these different species of birch. So it has to be on a birch tree. It has to have that cubic black cracking pattern on the outside. And it is black. It's not dark brown. It's black like coal. And then on the inside, there's another pattern that is hard to see, I'll admit, but it's speckled and kind of golden brown. It's not wood. So if you find some kind of burl on a tree and chop it off and look at it, it's going to look more like messed up wood. It's not going to have this certain pattern of chaga. And again, the computer camera can only show so much detail, and I do recommend looking closely at some photos of chaga, preferably the ones in my book, Gourmet Mushrooms of the Northeast. But there are other books, of course. And just like any mushroom, be sure of what you have before you go ahead and try to cook it. I just wanted to be clear that I don't consider showing you that on the computer to be quite adequate. You're going to want to look at some clear photos of it and read about it. But basically, we've given you the essential info about the chaga. And
you can mess around with it too. I've used it to marinate, to infuse some meatballs and make a gravy. And I've tried it with making a soup. There's a base for a soup with I think there are like cyanams in that too. Another kind of mushroom. But you can, just to get more of it in your diet, you can make rice or mashed potatoes using chaga.
So there's another thing that comes up with mushrooms, and especially with Facebook and the internet and stuff. People make things with mushrooms, and very often we're kind of looking at it and going, that's beautiful, and no doubt it's delicious, but I know you cannot taste the chanterelles in the glaze on the chicken that was used in the soup. It's just, it's too broken down. It's too much of a nuance. When we're talking about different species of mushrooms and how delicious they are, we're talking about like frying up a bunch of mushrooms and just eating them because they're so good. The black trumpets, for example, you can do all kinds of things with them. We've had them, sauteed black trumpets over swordfish. Emily's made some desserts with black trumpets. It's it's unbelievable what you can do with them. But maybe the best thing you can do with them is just saute them, sprinkle them with salt, and eat them as a side dish. They're that good. Like we said in the beginning, there's so many flavors of wild mushrooms that most people in this country are, unfortunately, totally unaware of. We all tend to think mushrooms taste like mushrooms, but there are spicy ones and sour ones and sweet ones, smoky ones, savory mushrooms of all types. Some of them are more meaty or earthy. We teach all kinds of people about this, by the way. We've taught a lot of fishermen and deer hunters. We've taught a lot of vegans and vegetarians. Mushrooms.
We even led a sermon about mushrooms in nature in a local church.
Very cool.
That's sort of beside the point.
More of our obscure resume points, but everybody loves mushrooms.
Yes. Well, I think they should be such an important part of our culture because they're nature's free food in so many aspects of things. And again, as our culture has gotten faster and faster, and we've left nature and we only go there to get our exercise in, that we've just forgotten what is available to us.
I agree, and we also think that mushroom hunting would be really good for a lot of people in our nation to learn for a lot of reasons. I'll get to the most important one in a second, but getting involved with mushroom hunting sort of vicariously teaches photography, cooking, and it encourages physical activity. It encourages reading and learning science, and perhaps most importantly, it sort of forces you to make a decision based on combining science and common sense. And I find that in daily life in this country, having a scientific understanding very rarely intersects with life and common sense and dealing with the world. And you end up having a lot of people thinking that science is hocus pocus because they can't see it. They can't see that it's real, and they can't quite grasp the fact that you can know stuff in this world, and a virus isn't a ghost that can only get you if you believe in it and let it scare you. No, it's a thing, and scientists can understand things, and mushrooms are things, and there's a science to it. Mycology, mycology. Mycology is the study of fungi. With a little bit of modern science, a little bit of basic understanding of this science of mycology, you can safely enjoy many, many cool mushrooms that may be right in your backyard for all we know.
Well, Ryan and Emily, thank you so much for joining us today. And again, your website is, give us your website again.
It's mushroomhunting.org.
Okay, really easy to remember, and they can purchase your book and sign up for your email list so they can get notified for any future classes you may be holding.
Yes, please do that. You can also email us directly, info@mushroomhunting.org.
Okay, and I'll be sending some pictures over later this morning just so you guys get an idea. I'm sure they're long gone, but it'll help me know in the future what to be looking for. So
that's right. If you know where mushrooms grow, that's a mushroom patch you may have your whole life.
Very cool. Well, thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate you sharing, and this has been fabulous. I learned so much, and I can't wait to head out and do more mushroom hunting myself.
Thank you very much, Michael. Yeah, it's good to be a part of this summit.